welcome back again to something I've been looking forward to, obviously, since the season ended. Going to do a season review. Now it's going to be a quick, well, relatively quick. You know me. A quick one ends up being an hour and a half video. I think what I wanted to do, because you could do it many different ways. Like season reviews, as you see on TV, obviously with big production, you can go into detail. You can make it a 4-hour one of some of the ones I've been watching from like the 90s. They just go into all the detail, all the background. I think for where I'm at now and what I want to do, like I'll watch all the races back as I have done, again, and I want to give sort of like a perspective looking back, kind of like a retrospective, like, okay, that was kind of foreshadowing something that's going to happen again. There's some really interesting things that at the time when you're watching, and even when I do videos straight after the race or the week after the race, certainly in the beginning of the season, I wasn't as focused. I was still pretty focused, but every single practice session, from midway season onwards, really matters, and the car development and things that happen off track. So the beginning of the season, so let's just jump straight into it. So the beginning of the season was obviously pre-season testing, was when things started to get interesting. So obviously Mercedes had won the last 7, Hamilton had won the last 4, 17, 18, 19, 20, yeah, the last 4, so he's 7-time world champion, get my words out, and things were looking very kind of pedestrian. Like Mercedes were always going to win, Hamilton was always going to win because he's the best driver on the best team. Apart from 2016, had a couple of close shaves in 17 and 18 with Ferrari. Then they shot themselves in the foot. Then, what else did we have? And then 2020 was kind of a weird... 2020 was a challenging season because of COVID and all the restrictions. You couldn't really do... It wasn't as normal. Like, there wasn't big crowds and big media and things like that. So, I think Mercedes, by virtue of having the best car in 2019, it's kind of copy and paste, and no one really made enough steps to chase up to them in 2020. That all changed. Pre-season testing, the regulations changed, as I mentioned here a few times before, essentially changing the aerodynamics, so the floor, so that basically the cars are getting lower, flatter, more downforce, sticking to the ground, and that really hurt Mercedes' concept, which is more flat, more like low rake car. So because they had a lot of their aerodynamics on the floor, and the FIA decided, right, we're going to cut away a lot of the floor to reduce the downforce. Conspiracy theories, as most people are, yeah, you could say that deliberately affected Mercedes. Obviously, FIA aren't out here to try and legitimately cut one team down, but obviously they're aware of what some of the concepts of the car were. Mercedes and Aston Martin were affected greatly from that. So pre-season testing came up. Mercedes were terrible, like terrible. I remember watching it at the time. They were like bad. They were like middle of the pack. Hamilton was struggling. The car looked terrible. Verstappen, shock. Straight away to the top of the timesheets, he set the fastest time for the first day, and then he was fastest overall by the third day. I think overall, what I learned, having watched some of the highlights back again, one funny thing that did happen actually, Mazepin almost crashed into Hamilton twice on day 2 and day 3. It's funny because that's going to come up later on. It's going to come up in Saudi, and where else they did. I think he also did it in Abu Dhabi actually, but. Yeah, there was a bit of foreshadowing there where Hamilton was going slowly on track, and Mazepin almost crashed into him. So that happened. I did find that quite funny. But I think overall it was McLaren. I remember at the time, I think it was McLaren, AlphaTauri, and Red Bull. Red Bull were obviously the best team at the time. And AlphaTauri and McLaren were looking good. McLaren were finally out of their kind of like slump after being terrible for so long. They had a good 2020. Lando Norris did quite well. Then you had Daniel Ricciardo, who was kind of my pre-season pick for greatness. He did all right at the end, but I mean, not as good as he thought he was going to do. But pre-season testing kind of went along. Mercedes were looking terrible, and everyone was thinking, right, game on. Bahrain comes along. Obviously, it's the same track. They test for this year. They tested at Bahrain, and the first race of the season happened to be at Bahrain, which is strange. So everyone's thinking, right, Red Bull are definitely gonna smash it. Qualifying comes along, and it was interesting early on because Perez didn't even make it out of Q2 because he gambled on tyres. He just didn't get a good lap in. Then the first run in Q3, it was Verstappen and Hamilton like neck and neck, like two thousandths of a second, 2 thousandths of a second between them. Second run, final run, everyone's charged up. Verstappen smashes Hamilton by 4/10. And then you had Bottas, Leclerc, Gasly. I mean, that top 10, I mean, pre-season, you'd have said, yeah, that's about right. Because it's going to kind of continue on throughout the season. That's exactly how it's going to be. Ferrari going to be right there, McLaren going to be right there. And then the other two spots are a case of who's going to be the best out of... It's always going to be AlphaTauri or Alpine, but you might get an Aston Martin in there. So it's a case of who really shows up on the day. That's who's going to take P9 and P10 normally. So the race comes along, and obviously everyone was excited for Verstappen Hamilton. The essential, the first real competitive outing between Verstappen and Hamilton. They get off the line. Verstappen is clear. I mean, Perez actually on the way to the grid. Perez broke down. So that's a lot of bad. I've noticed in the first four races I'm going to cover, there's a lot of bad luck that happens to the teammates of the main two protagonists. So Perez and Bottas get a lot of quite bad luck and like bad things, and some mistakes, self-inflicted, but things go wrong for them quite early. Like it's Perez's car broke down on the way to the grid, so he was already starting in P11. He had to start from the pit lane, so he had a kind of a badish start. And then I guess, on they go. Verstappen and Hamilton are clear, like well clear of the field. They're about 5 or 6 seconds left. Like I noticed this early on throughout all these races. Verstappen and Hamilton just clear off and they're like just gone. And then whoever's next, if Perez or Bottas has managed to be in P3, they'll just be circulating there on their own. But Verstappen and Hamilton just, even from the get-go, are just gone. And it's just them two gone and absolutely gone and dusted. The biggest misconception I've seen from this race is that Mercedes were that far behind. Like, obviously at the time they were behind, by virtue of being so far ahead, they're now kind of maybe a little bit behind. But in terms of the car performance, it was quite similar. Obviously, following a car is difficult, and when you're in pole, as Verstappen was, Hamilton was going to find it difficult to follow. I mean, it was an interesting race. I mean, up until the end where they switched tyres, Verstappen pitted again, and had a 15-lap chase down of Hamilton on hard tyres. So the gaps aren't going to come down that much, but they were coming down enough. He chased him down, tried to overtake. So the first real flashpoint, really, Verstappen and Hamilton, to take note of, was on lap 53. Really getting close through turn 1, turn 2, and then run down to turn 4. Verstappen goes round the outside. He kind of has the move almost done, but then he goes really far, stays off the track, overtakes Hamilton. Now, this was interesting because if he just bided his time, I think end of season Verstappen, well, who knows, but I feel like if later on down the season, if he had the same situation, he wouldn't have done this. And this is where I think Verstappen, en route to what he's ended up doing, I think this was the first step of, okay, I need to be a bit smarter here because Hamilton, is obviously a world-class driver. So I can't just do what I think is right. I have to think about it a little bit harder. So overtakes around the track. They tell him pretty much immediately. In terms of 4 corners later, they've already told him to give the place back. Now he lets him past on the DRS straight after they've passed the line. So Hamilton gets DRS, goes past him, and then what does go amiss? Obviously, Verstappen had a fast car chasing him down. Hamilton's charge for the next 2 laps goes under the radar because he still had to hold him off for the next 2 laps, charge the battery up, defend some more. So he ends up winning the race quite well. Late pit stop from Bottas. I think it was Bottas. Yeah, Bottas pitted for the fastest lap at the end. And you're going to notice when I put these the timings, the end of race classifications up, you'll see the gaps are quite odd. One thing I have noticed again, another little thing I've noticed from watching these races back, is the gaps between people isn't often like the real gap, because 9 times out of 10, as you're going to see, whoever's in second or third is just going to put fresh tyres on and try and get that fastest lap. Because it's kind of, I don't know what they can do with that. I'll probably get into it later on in the reviews, but it's a weird one because often whoever's got the fastest lap obviously doesn't need to pit and get the fastest lap, and normally it's the leader that has the fastest lap. Not always, but most of the time. So it kind of just it does add some spice. I'm glad they have added it, but it's a weird one because it really does open up the floor to all sorts of madness. And dodgy pit stops and people taking risks just to get an extra point is a strange one. So it's sort of seen as the first real challenge from Verstappen to get to Hamilton. And it was interesting because we thought, okay, cool, fine, we're going to have a good season. Like, they're all going to be good. They're all quite close. In terms of finishing orders, not a lot was particularly strange. I mean, Norris beat Perez, but Perez again started from the back, so he's done pretty well to get P5 there. Both the Ferraris in there, both the McLarens in there. Tsunoda ended up getting up there quite well, and Lance Stroll as well. So, I mean, it was a good start overall. Bottas getting the fastest lap was important for Mercedes at that point. And then one thing I did notice about, obviously, another big thing I've noticed is the safety cars were all coming in. And this is one thing I'm going to pick up on, for obvious reasons, throughout the season. So I'm going to highlight how these safety car procedures went, because I was always just switched off from safety cars. So I was always like, yeah, safety car, we all know what's going to happen at safety cars. They're going to do the thing, the car's going to come in, the lead car, and then it will continue as normal. So given what happened in Abu Dhabi, I'm going to go back and not make sure, but just see what they did throughout the season. I guess to further reinforce the ridiculousness that happened at the end. But that's one thing I'm going to be noticing. A couple of things I'm going to be noticing. Who's on the pit wall? So which team bosses are. So this one was Otmar Safnauer from Aston Martin. So I'm going to notice how many times they put Christian Horner on there, because that's a bit of a bugbear of mine. I'm also going to notice safety cars. And I'm going to notice what penalties are given out. So retrospectively, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back and be like, okay, cool, that's what they did there, and see how inconsistent it really was. Because it's easy to look back and be like, oh, they're really inconsistent here, but without having any actual evidence. So I'm kind of, nothing really too crazy went down here. It all sort of went how it went. Martin Brundle did note after the race that Verstappen should have been cleverer with the DRS. Now that's going to come later on. So that was an interesting thing to notice that he says. So yeah, that's the general gist. I will obviously explain who got on pole, who won the race. But I think the interesting thing is with hindsight, I'm going to look at mainly the consistencies or inconsistencies throughout the season and see if there's anything foreshadowing. And there's a lot of things in these four races that I'm going to do here that you see later on either is the same or ends up being quite different. So that I found quite interesting. Verstappen was also dealing with a little electrical issue. I'm not sure how bad it was because he obviously had pace, but yeah, generally speaking, this was the race where we had the strategy come into play. Verstappen chased down on hard tyres. Hamilton stayed out, and that was quite an interesting race overall. Imola was next. This one was actually, at the time, this was the real fascinating race because we had, first of all, it was dry in qualifying. So it was a dry qualifying. Everyone blasted round. Nothing really crazy happened. Sainz went out in Q2, which is a bit of a shock. The first run, they're all the main guys, including Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc, were all super close to each other. Like all their times are very, very close in the first run of Q3. Now the second run, Verstappen made a mistake. Norris actually was on the front row. Then he got his time deleted for track limits. Then Hamilton had a fast time and no one else could beat him. So Perez got close. Perez beat Verstappen. I mean, Verstappen made a mistake. It was quite a bad mistake. He would have got on pole. And I think Perez also made some kind of mistake. I remember they showed us. So it was an interesting qualifying session in the sense that someone had finally beaten Verstappen. Now, in terms of car development, that qualifying final classification, I mean, Bottas, what are you doing in P8? Like, mate, 4/10, half a second off the grid, like that. Again, that was another thing that foreshadowed Bottas's weekend in Imola anyway. But I don't know how. Again, this is definitely the first example of, mate, Bottas, you need to be way up there. There's no way you could be that far behind. You know, in terms of car development. I mean, Mercedes clearly are nowhere. I mean, if Hamilton is that close to Perez, you know, as he said in the Mexico Grand Prix, you know for sure that Red Bull have got the far better car. So at this point, Red Bull had the better car. This was in the dry. Everyone was chilling there. The Leclerc P4 was great. I mean, Ricciardo, both McLarens beating Bottas and Pierre Gasly. Okay, I mean, that kind of, again, like I said, set the tone quite well. And this was the one where it rained literally just before the race. Like, right before the race. And everyone's thinking, okay, it's going to be a wet race now. And Vettel, one interesting thing I noticed with the in terms of penalties, Vettel got a 10-second stop-go penalty for not having his wheels fitted at the 5-minute warning. Now, he started from the pit lane, I think, and the reason for that, Martin Brundle's explained a couple of times in the commentary, is that there was a crash in the 70s, I think it was, when they were still attaching the wheels late on, and then all the cars were starting to go. So that what the FIA decided, right, the wheels have to be on, and no engineers on the track with 5 minutes to go before the start of the race. That's a slam dunk rule, so like that's a safety rule. So 10-second stop go is a severe penalty. So that's an interesting side note in terms of, simple things that could easily happen to some. I mean, it won't easily happen to the top teams, but if one day Hamilton or Verstappen just they're still attaching the wheels for whatever reason, they'll get a 10-second stop go. So be prepared for that if that ever does happen. It very rarely does happen because everyone is well aware of that. Race start. This was, again, in terms of foreshadowing, this was a foreshadowing for Hamilton's will-to-will, well, not will-to-will, but his instincts in terms of battling other cars. So he was off the line. He got a bad start off the line, and it was wet, obviously. Verstappen goes down the inside. I mean, he's left the gap on the inside. I don't know, again, he probably wasn't expecting Verstappen to be on the inside. Shock, same as most of the season. But Verstappen, brilliant move. He kind of gets his wheel on the grass, ends up going wheel-to-wheel with Hamilton. Now, at the time, I remember thinking this is a more kind of harsh moment than I do think now. It was tough. I mean, didn't leave him room. When they got to the turn, he left him no room. But Hamilton probably shouldn't have been there in the first place, and he was alongside him going into a sharp chicane. It doesn't really make any sense that why, as Hamilton being on the outside when it's wet, trying to get round there wasn't going to happen. Ends up going over the bollards and does a bit of damage to his car. Luckily, they kind of hold on. He kind of holds off Perez for a little bit because following on that track on Imola is an absolute nightmare. And then we had a little period of kind of Verstappen just making a gap because Hamilton had a damaged car and he was trying to keep up, but Verstappen was building a nice gap. Pit stops happened. Hamilton did have a nice little charge early on in that race. He kind of got quite close. Pit stops happened. Slow pit stop for Hamilton. On we go. Then it all kind of flipped on its head when Hamilton, overtaking George Russell, his now current teammate at Mercedes. George Russell's on the dry line going into turn 9, I think it was. Hamilton has to go round on the wet side, skids off into the gravel. This is an unaided mistake. He just made a mistake straight up when he was second in the race. So he goes off, goes into the gravel, and then he ends up like not realising the turning circle of a Formula 1 car is worse than a London bus, ends up going into the barrier, breaks his front wing, and then he spends about 25 seconds trying to find reverse, goes out. He comes out in P7. I remember watched it back. Comes out in P7, and then literally, this is another thing that happens later on down the season. Things just happen like one after another. It's like one thing flashes up and then another thing flashes up. So while we're dealing with the fact Hamilton's now 7th with a broken wing, Russell and Bottas smash together. Those two have a little moment together. Safety car comes out. Hamilton pits under the safety car. So he pits under the safety car, gets a new front wing, new tyres, out he comes. And then in that whole thing, the red flag gets flown because obviously you need to clear up all of this debris. So that was another thing that was kind of referenced later on in terms of the red flag, changing tyres under a red flag. That whole thing kind of became more of an issue later on because everyone's kind of complaining about Verstappen doing it in Saudi, but Hamilton did it under safety car, but they were able to obviously fix everything completely under the red flag, which is fine. I don't really mind the whole fixing things under a red flag because if you're stopping the race, just sort the cars out because it doesn't make any sense to leave the cars as they are, let them all cool down, same tyres, and go out and try and, if you're going to restart the race, restart it with the best possible car available. So yeah, to me that wasn't really an issue. They did let the cars that were lapped. So in terms of, they're all in the pit lane. So this is the thing I know. They're all in the pit lane, and Hamilton and a group of other cars had been lapped because of the whole safety car thing and because of how the cars were going around at the time. A load of these cars had been lapped. So they said, right, you guys all get wheeled to the end of the pit lane and then go out and join the back of the train. So everyone goes out, do the lap while everyone else in the pits, including Verstappen behind the safety car. Hamilton and a load of other cars go around into the pit lane, and then the safety car brings all of them out, and then off they go. Verstappen almost spun on that safety car restart. Coming out of the last corner, he kind of goes about 90 degrees, gets it back, and then pins it, and off he goes. Then after that, it was kind of quite, well, not straightforward. Hamilton picked a load of cars off, as he often does. Went from P9 to P2, overtake Lando Norris is on soft tyres at that point. So that was a massive, and he got fastest lap, I think. Fastest lap? Yeah, he's your fastest lap. So this for Hamilton was massive damage limitation. So as bad as he did, making a mistake trying to overtake George Russell on the wet side, skidding off, damaging his front wing, got a slice of luck that the safety car came out and the red flag, so he was able to change all that stuff. But then he still ended up picking off all the guys from P9, ended up chasing Verstappen down and the fastest lap. So he retains the championship lead after that particular one. Another interesting side note in the middle there, Perez overtook, so he skidded off under the safety car. As they're following the safety car around, he skids off the track and two cars go past him. Perez gets back on the track and overtakes those two cars straight away, gets a 10-second penalty for overtaking under a safety car. I mean, that was obviously, overtaken, not like the Verstappen and thingy in Abu Dhabi. But still, it's interesting to note, like when it does, it very rarely happens because people know you can't overtake under a safety car. But you're even not allowed to overtake even if you skid off. So even if you skid off, or if you make a mistake, you can't just go and regain your own position because it's literally no overtaking under any circumstances. Again, safety issue. So if there's a safety issue, penalties just going to get handed out left, right, and centre because you can't. Because if you think to the worst possible example of it, people could get killed. So you can't just say, "Oh, I was in that position anyway," so it doesn't matter. If you try and speed up to try and overtake, I think that's the point. Speeding up and acceleration under the safety car is generally seen very, very much frowned upon. So that was the interesting part. Tsunoda got multiple track limits warnings, and then a black and white flag, and then a 5-second penalty. So in terms of track limits and getting black and white flags for things like weaving and dangerous driving, that's the kind of the end goal there in terms of penalties. So it was an interesting race. I mean, obviously damage. I remember at the time it was obviously damage limitation. Both Perez and Bottas, like I said, more bad. Like obviously Bottas crashed out. He had a long pit stop in the first race, and then he obviously qualified 8th, crashed out with his teammate. Perez obviously started from the pit lane, did it in P5 in Bahrain, and this particular one missed pole by that much, got a penalty, and then he spun off and ended up P12. So overall, at this point, the season was looking very entertaining because you had the likes of the likes of Red Bull and I mean McLaren as well. McLaren and Ferrari were kind of challenging at this point. I mean, I think Norris was P3 in the championship, mainly because Bottas had retired, but interesting start, and everyone's thinking, right, we got one apiece. They were like, right, one for Hamilton, one for Verstappen, on to Portugal. Now this is where things kind of got, this is where Mercedes, in terms of their whole organisation and their experience, this is where it kind of benefited them big time. Because they get to Portugal, Christian Horner's on the pit wall for the first time, which is quite interesting. Oh, going back to the previous race, through these first 4 races, I've got like a bugbear, Paul di Resta. Every time they go to Paul di Resta, like every time, it's a Red Bull. It's essentially Red Bull corner. Like he's supposed to be at Sky Race Control, looking at all the onboards, looking at general strategy and what people are doing. Every single, and I mean every single time. You can go back and watch the races and hold him in the comments. Every single time they went to Paul di Resta, it was what can Red Bull do to beat Mercedes, or something that's going to go wrong with Mercedes. It was always Red Bull. Like that's all you talk about. And I wish I was joking. I wish I was over exaggerating it. But literally, go back and watch the thing. Every time they go to Paul di Resta and race control, it was always Verstappen can do this to beat Hamilton. He can chart. Like it was all. It winded me up, and it winded me up throughout the season. Certainly towards the end of the season, when it got more intense, because all he would talk about was Red Bull. Now I know, quick like a tangent here. Twitter and everyone they're all like, oh, he's biased to him. There's going to be people with favourites, but what a lot of people do, certainly in the commentary and presenting, they at least you can mask it a little bit or offer different opinions. Don't offer only as if you're in one camp and offer the kind of the rebuttal to even people like Damon Hill, Nico Rosberg. You have your favourites, but there's always kind of like, it's kind of a neutral and it's not really a sensationalist sort of TV presenter sort of angle. Anthony Davis does a good job. He just offers such strategy advice. You go, oh, Mercedes can do that, Ferrari can do that, McLaren can do that. But certainly, I think Verstappen was probably the most polarising one for me, because he would only talk about Red Bull and Mercedes, Red Bull and Verstappen, and how things could possibly go wrong for Mercedes and what good strategy things Red Bull can do. But anyway, that's a mini rant about Paul di Resta. Obviously, he's a Sky presenter. He's doing the job that I don't know if I would want to do it, and he's obviously a former F1 driver, so he knows his stuff. But as far as pundits go, he could be a little bit less biased, but that's neither here nor there. Portugal comes along. Mercedes was strong from the off. In terms of qualifying, Bottas managed to beat Hamilton this one. Verstappen had a track limits violation in his first run, so he only had one chance to really qualify. Bottas and Hamilton both did a worse job in their second run. Verstappen obviously put a time up there, was 4/10 back. So overall, again, look at that top 10. It's as you'd expect: Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, and then you had Ocon in there, for Alpine. He did well. Vettel for Aston Martin. He did well as well. Race start. Again, it was an as expected. They all carried on as they were. Bottas, they had a safety car, and on the restart, Bottas did Hamilton dirty on the straight. This was when Bottas wasn't a team player. So this race and the next race, he wasn't like Team Mercedes like he was at the end, but he was doing everything to help Mercedes at the end. At the beginning, he was kind of still in old Bottas because he was still fighting for his seat. He was still with the team. So this is one where he kind of didn't really help Hamilton that much. He kind of weaving on the straight on the safety car restart, and then I think he waited a little bit longer than Hamilton was expecting. So Hamilton was off. Verstappen was right up beside Hamilton. He overtakes Hamilton. They have a little kind of back and forth for a little bit. Hamilton overtakes Verstappen on track with pace, so he had a much faster car at the time, and then it kind of like played out as it was. Perez stayed out to block Hamilton later on. Hamilton overtakes him later on, and then they just built up a massive gap. I mean, Hamilton, Verstappen and Bottas were 23 seconds ahead of Perez, who was 37 seconds ahead of Norris. So that in terms of gaps, they were just miles and miles and miles ahead of the rest of the race. And then there was a little kind of flurry at the end. Perez, Bottas and Verstappen all pitted to get the fastest lap. Bottas ends up getting it, which is another key aspect. Hamilton was in a league of his own in this particular race. Hamilton was on fire. Mercedes were much faster than Red Bull. I think this one probably spurred Red Bull on a bit because they thought, they had a slightly faster car in Imola. I mean, they obviously won the race comfortably in the wet, but in the dry they were P2 and P3, and obviously Bahrain they qualified by half a second on pole. On pole for Verstappen. Perez ended up starting from the pit lane, so he was kind of out of it. But overall, Red Bull was still better. But this was the first race where Mercedes were definitely better certainly throughout the weekend. I mean, they were strong in qualifying. They qualified, they locked out the front row. Bottas, wheel to wheel, just wasn't able to keep up with Verstappen or to hold him off for long enough. Whereas Hamilton had enough pace to get in, overtake Verstappen, and then pull away from him a little bit. So that was some interesting bits early doors. Moving on to Spain. This was a race. This was an interesting race. I mean, I remember thinking at the time, this was the one. So obviously they'd reshaped it. So they reshaped at the end of Sector 2. There used to be, after the DRS zone, a little. I don't know if you can call it. You can call it a hairpin. There's a hairpin, and then like a really tight. It was a really nasty corner. Certainly to drive. I'll say to drive on Formula One game. I always hated that particular corner. So they made it more not banked, but they made it more sweeping, like the changes to Abu Dhabi. So they've changed that part of the track. Now, qualifying was kind of fairly straightforward. This is kind of Hamilton country, low key. I mean, Hamilton won the last 4 races. I think he'd led the last, since 2018, mid 2018. So I think the last 2.5 races he's led every single lap. That's how dominant he's been on that particular track. Pit wall was Williams' team boss at the time. Qualifying was interesting because Verstappen got quite close. this particular one. And then obviously you had Perez down in 8th, which was absolutely nowhere. Leclerc was up there again. Ocon was up there again. Again, the same kind of pretty much usual suspects in terms of top 10. There wasn't any great shocks. I mean, Alonso was nicely tucked in there. He had a nice finish in the Portuguese Grand Prix. Now, racing-wise, this was the second real time, second time in 3 races that Verstappen and Hamilton had kind of been had some kind of, not contact, but like a close moment. I think this was almost contact. Turn 1, Verstappen's on the inside. This is off the line. Hamilton gets a bad start. They're side by side. Verstappen tucks in behind and gets a slipstream. Now, they sweep left, but again, Verstappen's gone in there hard. Hamilton's kind of got out of the way. This is another one where it certainly was a fair move. It wasn't a dirty move, but it was one of those strong ones that if Hamilton defended it, there's contact. So I think this was the one. I think Imola was kind of like a, all right, fool me once sort of thing with Hamilton and Verstappen. Like, he probably didn't think, well, maybe he did, but he probably didn't think, all right, cool, he's going to leave me out here. If he didn't know before, he would have known after Spain, because this is the one where, you know, it wasn't dirty, it was just a strong, very strong defence. And I think from Verstappen, this is kind of a hallmark of his driving, which is good, because you need to be strong. You can't let people drive around you, but there's a fine line. He treads it this way and that way sometimes. But I did actually like this move looking back. It was strong, but it was fair overall. Again, this particular race was definitely Hamilton and Verstappen checking out on a different. I mean, Martin Brundle said it many times. They're just on a different level, different plane completely. These two just checked out. Off they went, clear into the distance. They got bunched up with a safety car, and then the restart. This was the race. One thing I do have to note. This was the first time the Formula One broadcast team radio to FIA. So this was Toto. Well, unsurprisingly, they used Mercedes first. It probably happened to be the first one they wanted to broadcast, but they broadcast Toto Wolff complaining to Michael Massey. You didn't hear Michael Massey talk back, but you hear him complaining about Mazepin not letting the leader through. I think Hamilton was leading at the time, or no, he was either way. Hamilton was trying to overtake Mazepin, lapping Mazepin, and he wasn't really getting out of the way as quick as he wants. So this is the first time he was like, blue flags, Michael, blue flags. So he was kind of like complaining to Michael Massey about the blue flags. So that, obviously, as we know, is going to be foreshadowed throughout the whole season, and it obviously reaches absolute peak in Abu Dhabi. So that was interesting. This is the first time they heard it. And Martin Brundle even said at the time, I like that. I like that we have that now. That's what he said on the broadcast. Obviously, careful what you wish for, Martin, because it's you're not going to like it by the end of the season. Another strategy race. Hamilton stays out longer, pitted for mediums. Then they chased him down and got really close with about, how many laps was it? 22 laps to go. Hamilton pitted, got some new tyres on, got right up close to Verstappen, and then he pits again for another set of medium tyres. 22 laps, 22 seconds, and then at that point you're thinking, yeah, he could do it. At one point he was chasing him at 1.8 seconds a lap. So he was obviously going to catch him. Caught him, overtake him. Away he went. Max did a bit of weaving, I did notice that. Perez, Bottas and Verstappen could all in turn pit for tyres. So Perez was down in P4 or P5 at the time. He was able to pit to try and get fastest lap. Bottas then could pit, and now because there's a big gap behind Verstappen, Verstappen could then pit. So everyone's trying to pit for fastest lap. Turns out it didn't matter in the end. This was another really dominant performance from Hamilton. And it did not help that much. Again, I mentioned about Bottas. He kind of held him up for a couple of corners when he was chasing down Max on the final chase down. It was because I remember thinking at the time he didn't let him part. I mean, Perez just jumped out the way, let Verstappen go. But I think Bottas was still kind of fighting the urge to be a number 2 driver at this point. So I think that was definitely something to note going forward. Race finishes, Hamilton wins. Very good performance from Hamilton. Verstappen, again, P2. He pit for soft tyres at the end, grabbed that fastest lap. Top 10, again, nothing really, it's not really that surprising, but, you know, there aren't any shock at this point. There's nothing shocking in terms of finishing order. It's always going to be McLaren's and Mercedes, McLaren's and Ferrari's going to be behind the Red Bulls. And it's a case of who's going to win the actual race itself. So this one finished. Hamilton had a 14-point lead. I mean, enjoy it because he's not gonna have a lead like this again, I don't think. And then Mercedes led by 30 points. So I think overall, throughout the first 4 races, the general theme was Red Bull had the faster car, but I don't think they believed it at the time. I don't think they truly believed they could beat Mercedes. I think at the beginning they were thinking, right, we've had a good step, we've had a good pre-season, but I don't think, I don't think they really believed that they were like competitive. Obviously, Verstappen in a fast car is going to be fast anyway, and he was very, very good. But I think Mercedes and Hamilton were in that kind of like 7-time world champion, like keep it going, keep things going. And obviously Spain they even did a Formula One released its own sort of like mini movie about Mercedes' masterclass from the strategy point of view, and it was good. I mean, pitting him again to get fresh tyres on to really be able to overtake him at the end was pretty smart. So at this point, it was kind of like, right, we're thinking they're going to kind of copy and paste and keep going as we're going. The next couple of tracks were seen to be more Red Bull than Mercedes. So you had Monaco, Baku, France, and then 2 races in Austria. So, on paper, at the time, you're thinking, yeah, Monaco and the 2 Austrias were definitely max country. France, Mercedes had won it. I think they'd won every single race there. And then Baku was interesting because it had a very long straight. So this was poised, shall we say. And obviously it was kind of an early mix of Lewis and Max. Lewis had managed to win 3 out of 4. It's weird to think that he actually won 3 races at the beginning of the season. 3 of the 4 races. And the race he didn't win, he went from the gravel, a lap down, to coming second with the fastest lap. So I've broken these there's going to be 5 of these type of videos, and they're broken down to kind of like group in terms of the momentum shift. There were 5 key momentum shifts, and obviously I guess you could add more races in there, but I think in terms of the key stage of the season, this was stage 1. This was very much Lewis doing what he normally does, win races. Mercedes' strategy was on point. Verstappen was showing that he could actually compete because he obviously won a race. He got a pole position in the first race, but it was generally speaking Mercedes on top. They had 3 out of the 4 pole positions, 3 out of the 4 wins. It was looking good at that point. So yeah, appreciate you being with me on this first part. The next part is going to be 5 races. So obviously it'll be after Christmas. I'll post that one. Watch them all. Give you my 2 cents, and hopefully you enjoy it. So yeah, not a lot else to add on. Nothing to add yet on Abu Dhabi and how that ended. I think just to kind of post after obviously posting what I posted, my feature length video, watching a few more things, and seeing how it's all kind of developed. I think the overall feeling. I think the overall feeling is disappointment, but not from Hamilton's point of view. More just the way it was handled. It just feels a bit. I think the general F1 sort of community feels a bit sort of like. Even though I'd say even what I see posting, from the Max side of things, it's sort of like, man, that wasn't quite right. I mean, again, I've mentioned it, said it many times in terms of the deserving winner, but that last lap is, man. I wonder how it's going to change. I wonder if there's going to be any changes to the FIA. I wonder if they're going to outright say, yeah, we made a mistake, because I think that would probably be the thing that would kind of create the most like parity of like, if they said, right, we made a mistake here, we should have done that. That's fine, but there is a little clause in there saying he can do what he wants. So that I think that's why I'm reviewing all the safety cars, all the penalties, just making sure like, it's not on just to be like, right, I'm gonna have the power and just distribute it in a way that no one's ever seen before. But anyway, that's for a later date. When I get to Abu Dhabi, I'll probably talk more about it. But part 1 of 5 in the books. Appreciate you watching.